Okay, welcome everybody. This is going to be the last of our research-focused FPP sessions for the semester, unless something cool just drops in my lap, in which case maybe it won't be the last. In any case, today's topic is enhancing your research reputation and visibility, so something that applies pretty much across the board, certainly to FPP participants, although I saw from the registration we've got a lot of non-FPP folks here as well. I saw some faculty on the registration list, so that's pretty cool. Welcome everybody. Here to discuss the topic is Emily Hart. Emily is a science subject area librarian with SU and also the lead librarian for research impact. So we're going to be talking about things that you can do aside from the research itself to kind of enhance your reputation as a researcher. Research reputation management is a more complicated thing now in our teched up cyber age than it was for previous generations. So there are lots of tools and platforms out there that you need to have some kind of knowledge of, and that's a big part of what Emily's going to be talking about. Also with us is Lauren Earle, who's a graduate student in the iSchool. Lauren's going to be talking a little bit about SU's Surface repository and kind of how that relates to your research visibility and reputation management. So I won't take up any more of our valuable time. Instead, I'll turn it over to Emily and Lauren.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Glenn. Very excited to be here today. Thanks for getting this important topic on the schedule and for trusting us to talk about it. And I think it's an important topic across the board for graduate students, postdocs, faculty. But one of the goals is to elevate the research of the university. So this is today we're going to dig down into kind of some of the basics behind how a research reputation forms and some key places that you should be having research profiles, ways to network with people who are researchers. So anyway, again, Glenn mentioned Lauren Earle is here. She's an information literacy scholar in the libraries and part of the iSchool program, as Glenn mentioned. She's going to be assisting and doing a little section on Surface today, our SU's institutional repository. So we're going to do a variety of, I'm going to do some PowerPoint, some presenting, and then also a couple live demos of some of the sites that I think are pertinent. So without further ado, I'll get started on the presentation, but again, I'll probably be fumbling with my screen a little bit, going back and forth, sharing the PowerPoint and doing some live demos, and there will be some hands-on as well. Okay. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Okay. We're also going to be doing some, again, like I mentioned, hands-on. So I'll be putting, and mostly we're going to do that by utilizing the chat today. But if you do have questions, feel free to unmute at any time. I won't be upset if you just interrupt me, okay? Should also mention I've got a cough drop in. I had a cold, so I'm going to try not to cough too much. I won't be coughing on you, so that's a good thing. Or in this, you know what I mean, in the same room. It's been such an interesting thing to have a cold this fall with all the COVID fears. Just such a different scenario now. But thanks to our SU testing program, I'm free and clear, just a cold. Okay, so the title of the presentation is Enhancing Your Research Reputation and Visibility. Okay, so some of the learning outcomes, I'm just going to read these quick. Understand aspects that make up a researcher's reputation. Reflect how your career and life goals align with your research pursuits. Recognize how your choice in where to publish affects metrics and visibility. Understand traditional and non-traditional bibliometrics. Identify online profile, communication tools helpful in building a strong research reputation, and review information trends influential in building your research and career network. So again, these are all aspects that I feel are very important to establishing a good research reputation and getting your name out there. So what makes up a researcher's reputation? So the primary thing that makes up your research reputation is your output. So it could be presentation, it could be a journal publication, it could be a book chapter. Basically, what are your scholarly works and how you're sharing those scholarly works. And that's the next piece is, so where are you publishing? And then when you publish, how are you disseminating your research? And you're, sharing your different, again, scholarly works, your presentations with your audience. It could also involve things like data sets. Are you making your data sets public if possible? And then how you look at your reputation as a whole is basically, it's what attention are your scholarly works receiving. So again, it's first you're doing the research, you're doing the work of presenting, you're disseminating it, and then there are some strategies that you can do as well to get attention and bring attention to those works. Okay, so I'm going to pop a link into the chat quickly. Oops, that's not the correct link. 1 second. Okay, you should have a link in the chat now. So what we're going to do is I want you to take maybe 5 minutes to answer this really short survey. And some of the things that you are reflecting on are your research and career goals. And this will, I believe, really inform how you look at your research reputation. So I think it's important to take a few minutes to reflect. So if you wouldn't mind doing the short survey, and then we'll do a quick discussion when you come back at 10:45. Everyone has a couple more minutes to finish up the survey, but wanted to add that if you have comments or reflections after taking the survey, I'd love for you to put them in the chat. It could be one of your goals that you created, or it could be one of the audiences that you're really trying to target. Give everyone just another minute. No, it's not easy to reflect on your goals in 5 minutes. I have one comment in the chat that says there are too many audiences to identify. You can always come back to this, but would anyone be, there's another comment in the chat. I think there are some duplicate fields in the form. I apologize for that. There was one that asked for about your career goals and then one that asked for your research goals, which could be separate. But I apologize if there's a duplicate question. The questions are similar. Let's see. I see one that says my work is in science and environmental communications, so everyone is the audience, kind of. Someone is asking, is it best to focus your career goals or keep them open? That's a good question. Today, I'm just one person that's sharing some of the inside knowledge that I have about things like how publications accumulate metrics and some of the systems that I work in that help you communicate and talk about your research. But these are conversations that are much bigger than today's presentation that you should be having with Glenn in the graduate school and your advisor, your PI, your fellow students and colleagues. So I can talk, let's actually keep moving then, but I can talk a little bit about specifically how some of your career goals and your goals for your research may impact how you're talking about your research and where you're publishing and things like that, okay? So I'm just gonna share my screen again in a minute. And I don't know, Tamara, if I had answered your question or not, but kind of openly answered it, I think. Left it wide open, again, because this is a very broad topic in terms of setting up career and research goals. So let's see, sharing my screen. Can everyone see slideshow mode? Okay, excellent, thanks. Okay. So these are some of the reasons that I think the goals are important, especially for the conversation we're having today. So, and I would say that focused goals are important. So it's going to help you think about things like where to publish. So there are implications if you publish in a publication that maybe is behind a paywall and isn't open access, and your goal is to communicate about your science or research, or you're working on a research that affects maybe the global south or different places where they don't have access to information. That's a huge example of how your career goals wouldn't be aligning with where you're publishing your works. So we're going to be thinking about things like that today. It may influence what research or scholarly profiles you choose to use. And again, it may influence where you do things like broadcast or disseminate your research and where you focus your time and energy. Someone in the chat had said that they are environmental science and communications. And so you know, doing things like communicating your science doesn't always line up with traditional publication values or, you know, traditional publication kind of venues and things like that. So it depends on what your goals are and where you want to go with your career. For example, a faculty member may say, you know, we need to publish in this journal to get X, Y, and Z people to read this article because this is our target audience, but that may not align with your science communication goals because that journal is closed. So some of those things are what we'll talk about today. And again, feel free to put questions in the chat or just feel free to unmute as well. Okay. So again, these are some of the aspects of developing a research reputation. So this is a little bit of a repeat, but your research, career, and life goals should align and play a role in your decisions. You should select appropriate places to publish based on your goals. And then once you do that, you're going to set up an online presence and start taking credit for that research, making sure people know about the research that you did. And then another big piece, again, is establishing your network and communicating. Okay. So we're going to dive right into a super fun topic, journal metrics. I apologize, this is I've got some pretty text heavy slides, but I'm going to be jumping out and showing you examples to make sense of some of this. And I will make my PowerPoint available after the presentation today. Journal level metrics or journal metrics are things like impact factor. That's one of the ones that people see the most often. So when you're publishing in a journal, there are a couple different types of metrics. There are the credibility or the metric that the journal has. So if you publish in, for example, the journal has a specific metric that's associated with it that shows like the quality and the attention that that journal gets. It's an indicator sometimes of the reputability of that journal. There are also author level metrics. So the cumulative value of your publications. So how many times are your publications getting cited? And then there are also article level metrics, which are how many times are those articles or book chapters being cited. So right now we're focusing on the journal. And I'm just going to read the definition quick. But journal level metrics measure the aggregate impact or influence that a journal has on its discipline or community. So again, we're looking at basically the journal's reputation. How much attention is that journal getting? And something like journal impact factor, they're looking at the cumulative number of citations all articles within a specific journal receives over a specific period of time. So you may see a journal impact factor of 5 years. So it's basically taking the Journal of Communication Disorders. It's looking at all the publications or all the articles published within the Journal of Communication Disorders over a 5-year period. And then it's looking at how much attention those articles are getting. So it's looking at other articles, so other people that are publishing in other journals, how many times are they citing those articles in the Journal of Communication Disorders? If you need to clarify that at all, please put it in the chat or again unmute. But basically, again, the journal metrics are a way to look at that journal's credibility and the amount of attention that journal gets in a field. So something you might hear is this journal has a high impact factor. You should try and target this journal because you know that that journal is getting, because it's getting cited, because it's getting a lot of attention, that your works may get more attention as well. It's also an indication that typically people are targeting that journal. So you're going to see a lot of like the current research in it. And, you know, it's a hot place for people to publish in that field. So I want to talk just a little bit about the right-hand column of this slide. So there are, again, as I mentioned, different metrics or journal metrics, journal rankings. Journal impact factor is a common one. It is a proprietary metric that is made up by Clarivate, which is basically everyone knows it as, well, their main product is Web of Science, or one of their main products. So it's a common journal metric that they use, again, to measure the attention a journal is getting over a specific period of time. If you're familiar at all with the literature database Scopus, their metric that's very similar to impact factor is site score. And we have access to both Web of Science and Scopus through the libraries. There's another one, which is a freely available journal ranking system called SciMago. I'm actually going to skip down. Eigenfactor is another journal ranking system that you can use, and as well as Google Scholar. And I can't tell you off the top of my head the difference between Google Scholar H5 index rankings versus impact factor versus site score. They use like mathematic formulas to figure it out. And each has their own, problems in how they do their formula, and maybe slightly biased in some ways. But for example, some formulas may take into account a journal rank and weight it differently in their scores. But one of the things that I do want to point out here is this, can everyone see it says SNP? Okay, that is called Source Normalized Impact Factor. And, or that's what it stands for. And it's a different type of metric that I think is important to know about. The other metrics are all looking at journals across all disciplines. With maybe the exception of, I can't remember if Eigenfactor or SciMago do the same thing, but for the most part, impact factor, the H5 index for Google Scholar, they're looking across journals, all different fields. For example, if you're going to publish, if you're publishing in, say, maybe an epigenetics journal or something on, that's cutting edge science in biology or medicine, the chances that your article are going to get cited at a higher rate because it's fast moving science are greater than if you're publishing in an anthropology journal. And it's the nature of the discipline, but the anthropology journal may get greater accumulation of citations over time. So a journal from 1980 publishing anthropology may still be relevant to today. So what SNP does is it looks at subject areas. So it's, instead of comparing across all journals, SNP looks at just biology journals, let's say, or just genetics journals, something like that, and is comparing that subset of journals and looking at the quality of, that ranked list in that subject area, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm spending a lot of time talking about journal rankings, but I swear it's important. It's important to understand kind of what's going on behind like research reputation. Because when—
Sorry, we have one quick question about which is the most common or widely used metric?
It's a great question. I would say, and so one of the things that I do is I work with faculty to put together their pieces of their tenure promotion file, where I may pull in some of these metrics to show the impact that their works are making. So some of the journals, I often do a variety of statistics depending on what field they're in. It may look very different if they're in humanities versus, again, like biology or communication sciences and disorders. But typically everyone knows Google Scholar. That's a very common one. And as you move on from SU, there's also a chance that you may not have access to Scopus or Web of Science to access those metrics. So you may need to use something like Google Scholar. The caveat with Google Scholar is that the citations are often higher, or the values are often higher because they're including, sometimes the things that are included are maybe less than reputable, which is not anything that you can control, but that's why I also recommend to faculty typically to include maybe another metric like impact factor or site score, as well as the Google Scholar rankings to show the difference between the two. I'm going to get to that a little bit later in the presentation, but does that, let's see, I hope that answers the question a little bit. That it depends on the field, and Google Scholar is probably the most common one out there as far as you're putting something on a grant application or resume for a postdoc position or CV, and you want to throw in a measure or something that talks about the impact factor of the journal that you put in, or the Google H5 index. They're going to know what you're talking about, okay? And the reason you might put something like an H5 index or impact factor into your resume or CV is you want them to know that you're publishing in high quality journals, okay? So it tells about the quality of your work, essentially. Okay, I'm not sure what the distribution of everyone is in the audience today, but there are also book metrics that you can collect. Amanda, are you there? Thanks, Amanda. I've done that several times before. Accidentally leave your mic on. There are also metrics collected for books and book chapters. So you're literally, again, counting how many times those chapters are cited by other people that are publishing. You can also look at book reviews, and you can also, this is maybe a lesser known one, but an indication of the popularity of a book is also how many libraries are buying that book. And I have a link here at the bottom again, and you'll have these notes for later, but we have a research metrics guide, which you can go back and look at a lot of these definitions that I'm sharing with you. Author metrics, I mentioned this briefly before, but a common one that you'll see is the I-10 index and the H index, and those are pretty common across disciplines. So basically what they're looking at is the attention your works receive over a designated period of time. So I-10 index, for example, Google Scholar, they're looking at a 10-year period, or maybe it's not 10-year period. They're looking at it over a certain period of time, but they're looking at any publication that receives 10 citations or more, okay? And then they're looking at the average number of attention or citations that your publication's receiving. But the bar is pretty high, like to have a publication that gets 10 citations. So one of the reasons we're talking about this today is that I'm talking about metrics that you're going to accumulate over time in your research career. But later in the presentation, we're going to talk about alt metrics and things like communicating your science and making your publications open access, which as an early career researcher, or someone that maybe is looking for a postdoc position again, or a fellowship, applying for grant applications, you're not going to have those metrics accumulated yet. So there are other ways that you can talk about these things. Again, you can talk about the quality of the journal you published in, even if it hasn't received those metrics yet. So that's an important thing to know about. It takes time to accumulate these things, and it does not favor early career researchers.
We have two questions in the chat. One about the region heavy publications, and then one just about like pre-printing.
The one about the regions is interesting, and I may have found this and would be happy to get back to you on it, but it may be a case where, again, it's a very small discipline or subset of research that's happening. So if it's research on a specific location or region, then you may want to look at the journal metrics, something like SNP, that's looking at and comparing the journals in your field, as opposed to looking at impact factor, again, which looks at them across all disciplines. So I'm not sure if I answered that question. Feel free to unmute or again, put another question in the chat. I am not going to talk a ton about preprints today. It isn't a really important topic. I will mention it a little bit, but that could probably be a whole separate session in itself. So, okay. So I'm going to move on from author metrics. Okay. So we're going to, the reason I wanted you again to know a little bit about metrics is knowing about those metrics influences where you publish. I'm just going to read through this a little bit, but audience. So are you targeting a specific person or audience? This is something I mentioned earlier, that your advisor or PI may say, we need to publish in this journal because we want to get this grant next time, and I know this person reads this journal, or this is a top journal in our field, let's go for it. So in that case, you should be having conversations with your colleagues and with your advisor, your PI, things like that. Because they are going to know best. But again, I'm also encouraging you today to think about your career goals and how those play into this conversation as well. Journal impact, I had gateway publications to pursue a career field in X. So that's kind of the same thing. Does everyone publish in this one journal? So journal impact and reputation. What is the impact of the journals you are considering to publish in? Again, if you maybe haven't accumulated those citations yet, despite that fact, if you have a journal or if you have a resume and you're sending it out, but you have published in a really reputable journal, people are going to notice that. And you can also throw in some statistics on that journal to contextualize it. Open access and author's rights. So this is something we're going to talk about next, I believe, but open access has been known to increase citation counts. So the more that people can access your publications, the more, it's getting it out there, it's making it visible. So that's one of the reasons. And then what kind of reuse rights do you retain as an author? And so when you're publishing again and thinking about these journals, you want to check their copyright and author reuse right policies before you publish in them so that you know how you can share it afterwards. You always want to check the credibility of a journal. There are things like predatory publishers out there where their prime mission is to make money, and they are trying to prey on people, or not prey, that's a terrible word, but they're trying to take advantage of people that are desperate to publish, essentially. So you have to know what to look for in a good journal. And then the impact of your citation metrics and alt metrics. So how will the place you publish affect your citation counts and reach? Again, that's similar to what we've been talking about. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about publishing models now. Again, these are, important pieces for understanding research reputation. So, okay. I'm going to talk through this slide. It's pretty dense, but so if you were to go to a journal, for example, like communication disorders or Nature, things like that, anything that we have that we subscribe to in our, well, I guess not all of them, but many of the things that we have in our databases, so something like Scopus or Web of Science, many of those are you may not cost to publish in those journals up front, so you as the author may not be charged, but libraries and individual subscribers are paying tons of money to access, to pay for access to those journals. And it means that they're behind a paywall. So if you were to click on a journal through the library's website, one that wasn't open access, it would ask you to log in with your SUNet ID and password. That means it's behind a paywall and that you can't access it unless you have a subscription or you're willing to cough up some money to pay for it. I have students come to me all the time. They find things on Google Scholar and they say, I just paid, Emily, I just paid $50 for this article on Google Scholar. And I kind of, if I could pat them on the back right now, I, would. But it basically, you never have to pay. You should never have to pay for anything through SU libraries because we can interlibrary loan it for you. But the point is, people don't know the difference between what they can access through their libraries. They may work for, if you're not working for a university, if you're working for a small nonprofit, you're not going to have access to those articles. So again, this is an example of where your career goals and research goals, if you want to have a broad reach for your research, you should be paying attention to your to the reuse rights and for that journal. If that makes sense. So anyway, subscription, think paywall. You can't get in without having a subscription and paying, okay? So gold APC journal is when gold means it's completely open access, but those gold journals often mean that the author has to pay what's called an article processing charge. Basically, when you go to submit that journal, you should know ahead of time that the journal is going to probably ask you to pay. There are sometimes libraries have agreements with some of those journals where there's a discount for publishing in them. Sometimes faculty write open access. They may write into a grant that they want to publish in an open access, completely open access journal. So they may write those funds into the grant, for example. So some universities, not Syracuse University, will help you offset the costs of things like our article processing charge, but that's not across the board. So you can pay to make your stuff open access, completely open access. And I should say up front, open access does not mean predatory. It does not mean that that journal is not high quality. It just means that it's a different model for accessing those publications. So instead of people having to access it and pay for it after the fact, the author or some other entity pays for those charges up front, okay? So you also have gold journals, completely open access journals where you may belong to a society, for example, and the fees for that society pay for the costs of publishing, for example. Hybrid journals, this is semi-new, well, maybe not new anymore, but it's a model where you may go to submit your manuscript and they may say, if you want to make this manuscript open access, you can pay for the article processing charge, or you can do a traditional publishing model and you can submit it and it would be behind that paywall. So you could either choose not. So this is the green journals. The last option is something that is much more attainable for most people. So a green journal is basically, it could be an open access, well, it wouldn't be a gold open access journal. So it could be a hybrid journal, but it could also be one of the traditional journals like that toll access or behind a paywall type, more of the traditional publishing model. But in the journals, like copyright author reuse right policy, it says that you can post or put a post print onto your personal website into an institutional repository like SU's institutional repository Surface. This is an important piece because a lot of you get government funding, any government funding, NIH, NSF, and on, US Education Department, you get funding from any of those places. There's a mandate that you make a version of your research or your publication open access because taxpayer dollars were used to fund that research. So this really, again, is very important for you to understand the publication, the copyright and author reuse rights around different journals. So basically a green journal is that, so say you've gone through multiple rounds of editing for your manuscript, you get to the final version, so the final peer-reviewed version of your manuscript. That's called the postprint, sorry. And again, you can put that, it'll often say in the journal's reuse policies that you have the ability to put that on your personal website or again, in something like PubMed Central or the NSF's, I'm drawing a blank on it right now, but NSF's directory of publications at the Syracuse University Institutional Repository. So you have access to repost that. So you are essentially, you're still publishing in that subscription-based journal. So you're not paying to publish it, but you still have those rights to publish a version of that article or manuscript in a different location. So you still are making it open access. So it's called green open access or green journal. So I see I have a couple questions in the chat. Lauren, do I have a bunch of questions?
Nope,
or
it's
that I
just
missed?
it's just like a one recent question. I was answering the previous ones. You're good.
Okay, thanks. Public health. Okay. Some Elsevier journal, peer reviewed, open access view. So it sounds, I don't want to necessarily comment on Lancet Public Health without actually, reviewing the policies for that journal, but it sounds like it would be a gold open access journal where an article processing charge is required in order to publish in that journal. But again, I don't want to comment without fully looking up the journal's policies. I'm gonna I may jump out now and show you an example of a website where you can look up different reuse policies for journals. So I'm just gonna X out of my screen for a minute. Does anyone have any questions about the different journal types or publication models? Green open access is fairly common now because publishers have had to change over time and adapt to things like the public access mandate for government funding and things like that. So they have adapted over the years, and more journals do allow you to make your post-print available. Your preprint is not something, preprints, I had mentioned that I would talk about them a little bit. There are preprint servers like bioRxiv and archive where you can publish your unpeer-reviewed manuscripts and get feedback from people in those communities, from other people that are publishing in archive and bioRxiv in these repositories. But that is not the version that goes on something like SU's Institutional Repository or in PubMed Central, things like that. That's supposed to be your version after peer review, so your final peer-reviewed manuscript. So that's the post-print, and the preprint is pre-peer review, okay? And by peer review, again, I mean it went through like the formal process of being submitted to a journal, and the reviewers reviewed it. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to pull up Sherpa Romeo. I tried to pull this up earlier today and it wasn't working well, so I'm hopeful that it comes up this time. So just give me a moment while I pull it up. Yeah, I apologize, but this is down for some reason today, this website. Let me try one more time. You're welcome to try and Google. It's called, let me put the name in the chat for you all, but it's called Sherpa Romeo. But basically, and it's not, it indexes most publications, I would say, journal publications, but there are some that you may not find in there. But basically, it's going to tell you if you put in the name of the journal, so if you put in Nature, Lancet Public Health, you put that into Sherpa Romeo, it should pull up and show you, list what kind of reuse rights the journal has and whether it's a gold open access journal, a green open access journal, things like that, okay? So it's something to look at down the road when it's working. And remember that that's there because it's an important, it's a great resource. The other thing that you can always do is you can always look at the publisher's website to find this information, okay? Okay, let's continue on. I'm going to share my screen again with the PowerPoint. Okay. So I think I probably made this point already, but why should I consider publishing open access? If your goal is to reach a wide audience, increase your impact and citation counts quickly. So because, again, open access journals aren't behind that paywall, more people are going to have access to that information. It may help to advance research in your field. For example, if you're in, I don't know, the science in a medical field and you try and publish something, but people can't get to it because maybe it doesn't become available till a year later, then people are missing your research, and it may be key or critical research. It improves the reproducibility. So well, a piece of open access is obviously the actual journal, but you can also do things like make data sets open access and make your survey instruments open access, things like that. And you're helping people understand how you got to your answer. And it's, understanding that is huge for like knowledge and like the community overall. And then I mentioned this before, but many grants that you receive will have a requirement to make your works publicly or open access, so that people won't have to pay to get your work. One thing that I didn't mention that's probably worth mentioning is that funders, like some journals, will say, yes, you can put the post print on your website or in an institutional repository, but you have to wait a year to do it. So there's something called an embargo. But that's usually clearly defined in the journal's copyright reuse policies, or again, it should show up on Sherpa Romeo. It might say, this has to be published or posted within 12 months, or it can't be posted within 12 months, something like that. Okay, so if you have questions about open access or any of the things that I've talked about today, you can reach out to your subject librarian. So there is a subject librarian that's kind of designated to every major on campus or every department, college. So I work with the sciences, so I apologize. I think my presentation is definitely slanted towards the sciences because that's what I know best. But we have a humanities librarian, and or librarians that deal with the humanities and may have better answers than I do for some of these questions. So feel free to reach out to your librarians. Okay, the next up, I'm just gonna give a quick overview of Surface, and then I'm gonna hand this off to Lauren so she can actually show you an example of what Surface is. But Surface is our institutional repository for Syracuse University. It is meant to kind of cumulatively have one place where people can access and standpoint, thinking about each of us individually have our own research reputation, but the university as a whole, we're also trying to elevate the research of Syracuse University and get more people here and get more funding for research, things like that. So Surface is a place where you can put those post prints and copies of your articles in some cases, depending on the reuse policy of your the journal that you publish in. But so Surface should be a key step in your process. You should, if you publish in your journal, allows you to put a copy of that manuscript or that post print into Surface. You should do that because it's another place where people can link to your work. You're going to get those citation counts and more attention, things like that. If you have questions about what can be included in Surface and what can't in terms of again, a reuse policy or copyright guidelines, there's a specific email. You can reach out to surface@syr.edu and they can answer questions for you and help you get your stuff into Surface. I should have mentioned this, but it's also the place that, or one of the places that we archive copies of our theses and dissertations. So take it away, Lauren.
Exciting. Okay. So again, my name is Lauren. I'm a grad student here Let me share my screen to you real fast so that you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to teach you a little bit about Surface and why it's kind of neat. It is a part of Syracuse University Libraries, and it's one of the databases that we can access the same way you would access any other database. So you can go to our research database tab and search up Surface, and it's right there. One of the really cool things about Surface, as is with a lot of the different databases that we connect to, is that it is summon searchable, right? So when I was playing around a little bit, I was interested in seeing like, what were some of the dissertations, sorry, and theses that have been published recently. So I went down, it's organized by, you can look at dissertations and theses, you can look at different academic units or disciplines to see what other people in the department have published and to just get a look at them, right? While I was going through, I actually saw one that was published in 2019 about what's called gamification in online classes, which is a pedagogical strategy where they make classes games in order to like get people more excited about it. So then I thought, like, you know, I want to double check these dissertations can be searchable through the actual university library, which is pretty exciting. So all you have to do is library.syr.edu, and I put in gamification, and it already is auto-correcting because it saw that I did the search earlier. Online classes for this particular thesis or dissertation, and it should be, well, it was here earlier. I apologize. Oh, here it is. Gamification interaction with an online course. I spelled it slightly different. But what's exciting about this is that it means that anyone who's doing research through Syracuse University's Summon website can find your dissertation or theses. It is what Emily talked about earlier, open access. And that's really exciting because it can increase your account, and it can also mean that people are coming and seeing your research alongside anything else in their field. And it's a pretty exciting way to reach your community that helped support you in your research too.
Thanks, Lauren.
No problem.
Anything, I will just add quickly to what Lauren said, that it's Summon, or sorry, not Summon, Surface, which again is the institutional repository, is also indexed by Google and some, you know, the other major, you know, search engines. So, and we pay special attention to that on the back end. There's a whole Surface team that works on things like digitization and making sure that our stuff is discoverable. So putting it here, you can see that little, if you scroll down, Lauren, there's that little map. It shows you different readers worldwide, top 10 downloads, recent editions. So it's worth coming in here and just looking through it a little bit. But while you're at Syracuse University, you are going to be, again, your dissertation or thesis should be archived in Surface, but consider also adding any post prints of manuscripts that you, peer-reviewed manuscripts to Surface as well, as long as the copyright allows it. And it's going to bring increased attention to your work. Thanks, Lauren. That was really helpful. Okay, I'm gonna share my, actually, before I do that, before I go back to the PowerPoint, I should have done this before, but I'm just gonna take you into the library website quick and show you a place where you can look up some of those different metrics that I mentioned. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen, and here we go. I, for some reason, always talk out loud when I'm sharing my screen or like going through the steps. All the kind of crazy things that like come out when you're doing Zoom classes as opposed to in person is interesting. Okay, so I'm on the library's website. I'm going to go to databases. And I mentioned before that we subscribe to several different major citation databases that include those journal metrics. So Web of Science, Scopus. Another product that you can look up, and I believe it is in the PowerPoint, we have something called Journal Citation Reports. You might want to jot that down. We also have one called Journalytics. And Journalytics also includes things like average acceptance rate, I believe. So it's got some interesting statistics on, again, those journal metrics. And you can, I want to just reiterate, the reason it's important to understand those journal metrics is that if you want to discover, is that journal reputable? Is this a good place to be publishing? And also you can use descriptions, like if you're, again, in your CV and you're applying something, you can say, I published in Lancet Public Health and it has an impact factor of X. And that's going to help people draw attention to the fact that you're publishing in high quality places. Okay, so you can use those stats to talk about your stuff in a way that you know, draws attention to it and says, I'm doing great things. So on the database list, I'm going to click on S for Scopus. And it's going to bring me to the login screen. There it goes. So again, this is behind, well, the Syracuse University pays for this database or pays for access to this database. So you need to log in to access it. Can everyone see it? It says my internet connection is unstable. I live out in the country, so sometimes the internet is a little sketchy here. It does the trick most of the time, but okay. So what I want to do is, this is a search that I do regularly, so it pops up, shape memory polymers. It's a popular topic in physics and bioengineering, and I work with a bunch of the researchers in that area. So I'm going to do a quick search for this. You can also search for the publications individually, but I think that this is an easy way to do it. That's interesting. Let me just back my search up real quick and just do shape memory polymers. Okay, so you can see that in Scopus, all of the journals are clickable. So Chemical Engineering Journal, International Journal of Mechanical Sciences, Applied Surface Science, Geothermics. Let's just look at Chemical Engineering Journal. I have no idea what the rank of this journal is, but sorry, it's a little bit slow to load. But you can see here, this looks like it's a very highly ranked journal. But there, you're getting the site score here, and it gives you a little definition of what site score is. And you've got your, gosh, I'm forgetting what SJR stands for right now. And then SNP, I mentioned before, is that source normalized impact factor, which is comparing this journal to others in the field. So the other thing that I really like about Scopus, and Web of Science does this as well, I think, actually I don't know if it shows up in Web of Science, but Journal Citation Reports is a Web of Science or Clarivate product, so you can find it there. It also gives you the rankings. So you can say, this journal is ranked #2 in the 99th percentile out of 340 other journals that they classify as being industrial and manufacturing engineering. Isn't that something that's something that you can definitely use and talk about on your LinkedIn profile, or in, you know, when you're referencing your publications or talking about your publications and where you're publishing. So I often think that this is very nebulous, like the 15.2, 2.315. I believe that they're often based on 1, so greater than 1 is better than average. But no one else understands those numbers typically either. So I like using the ranks here, how they rank them in the field. I think that's a much easier way to talk about it. For example, Journal Citation Reports talks about quartiles. So there's Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. Q1 is above average, Q1 and Q2 are above average, and Q3 and Q4 are below average journals in terms of how they rank. So anyway, I wanted you to just come into Scopus quick. And again, Web of Science is a great place in Journal Citation Reports to look at journal metrics as well, where you can just grab some of these statistics quickly and learn about that journal. The other thing that I think is very important to note here is that when you're talking about journals, if a journal is indexed in a database like MLA Bibliography International, which is big in the humanities, or if it's indexed in PsycInfo, which is a psychology database, or Scopus, Web of Science, someone has reviewed that journal already and checked on the credibility. So by being indexed in this, in this literature database, this big citation index, it's adding a level of credibility just because it shows up here, as opposed to sometimes things like Google Scholar. Again, they're pulling in things that may not be quite as reputable. Another great resource, and I believe I have it in the slides, is the Directory of Open Access Journals. That's a fairly, well, I wouldn't say comprehensive list, but those are open access journals that have been reviewed. And if they're added to that list, it means they also have a level of credibility. Okay, I also quickly wanted to point out that Google Scholar also has a place that you can search for metrics for journals. So this is like the top one, things like the Lancet, New England Journal of Medicine. So those are always, they always get really good high scores. I should also say that just because they have the high scores, it doesn't mean that the research in other journals isn't credible. It just means that these are very popular journals that have been around for a long time, and they get a lot of attention. They have a wide readership. So one of the things you can do in Google Scholar, though, is that you can narrow it down. So if we did social sciences, you can do categories and then subcategories, which is kind of cool. So we wanted to look at environmental law and policy. It's giving us the top journals, 20 journals in environmental law and policy. The other thing that you can do, it's not obvious, but can everyone see up in the little corner there, there's a magnifying glass? So if I wanted to type in the word communication, which is probably a terrible search to do, but you can pull up any titles that have the word communication in them as well, and it'll compare them to other titles on communication, for example. So in Google Scholar, Metrics is a freely available service. So after you leave SU, you will not have access to Scopus, Web of Science, Journal Citation Reports. So some of those other ones that I linked to in the presentation, like SciMago and I forget it's the SJR one, and then Google Metrics, you do have access to those. And it is a tool that you can use to just go in and get some quick metrics on a publication that you're looking at, okay? So I'm gonna stop sharing this quick. I'm gonna pop out and I'm gonna try and spend the rest of the time talking about different profiling services of where you should, things that you should have a presence on in order to enhance your research reputation. So I'm just gonna share my PowerPoint screen again quick. Maybe. Okay, here we go. I'm gonna just breeze through this slide. Again, you can reference it after the fact if you'd like. So we talked about this a little bit as well, so I'm gonna kind of breeze through this, but it's why should you communicate about your research? And I like this quote. Most of my colleagues make me laugh because they are so clueless. They think their work is over when they hand the final proofs to the publisher. It's from an anthropology professor in that publication that was quoted in that publication. But it's basically saying that it's not just about publishing your work. You have to make your work discoverable. So again, it matters where you're publishing. It matters where you deposit your stuff afterward. And then again, the next thing I'm going to talk about is your research profiles. Okay. So your visibility as a researcher, this is really important. Okay. So there are some essentials. Does anyone, whoops, sorry. Hope I didn't give you whiplash there. So does anyone, if you put in the, could you put in the chat, I was gonna do this as an activity, but if, for the sake of time, if you use ORCID, if you have an ORCID profile or a Google Scholar profile, or use any of these others that are listed on the bottom, if you wouldn't mind sharing that in the chat, I'm just curious what you're already using. Okay. So ORCID is super important. ORCID is probably now one of the most common places where you can have a list of your publications. Okay, ORCID, what it is it's an online, basically digital identifier for your for you as a person. So if there's, I actually know that there's another Emily Hart librarian out there. Apparently there are lots of us, at least one, because we both signed up for a conference once and they got us confused in the registration. So if I publish something, Emily Hart, like I published something, I'm Emily K. Hart, but Emily Hart also published something, but maybe our names got confused. And then the other Emily Hart took credit for something that I published. That's bad, you don't want that. And that actually happens a lot. So in research, that other people's, your names are very similar. And you know how hard it is to search for authors. Sometimes they include the middle initials, sometimes they don't. So there are all these variations of names. You don't want the only way that people can discover you is if you have, you know, by your name and someone else may have the same name. Long explanation, but ORCID is a unique ID number that you get as a researcher. It's a free service that you should sign up for, okay? It's, you sign up, you get this ORCID ID number, you can put it in your email signature, in your profile, you put it on your LinkedIn profile, you put it in your CV, and then people can go to your profile website and you can add information, you can add a biography there, you can add your publications, employment history, but primarily it's a place to link your publications to so that you have a unique record for yourself. You're going to see ORCID when you submit a manuscript. Now, I submitted a manuscript not too long ago, and they asked me to link my ORCID ID to my manuscript when I submitted it. If you go to conferences now, they'll ask for your ORCID ID sometimes. If you're applying for grants, ORCID is something they will ask for. Okay, so anyway, you should just do it. Trust me. If you want to be a researcher or be in academia, it's a way for you to take credit for your work and for people to discover your works. The other big one is Google Scholar. And Google Scholar, Google's really popular, not necessarily in all countries, but you know, in the United States, Google Scholar is very popular. So it's very likely that if you go in for an interview for a fellowship or a postdoc position, they're going to Google you probably. And hopefully they find your Google Scholar profile, which links to all your publications and your citations. So it's a really easy way to get people to notice your work. The other thing that you can do is not only can you sign up and curate your, to have a Google Scholar profile, you can also automatically have it notify you if there's, or pull in publications. So it will recognize if you have a new publication and ask you if you want to add it to your profile. So things like that, there are some automated features. LinkedIn, there is obviously LinkedIn is a very popular service, but there is a place in LinkedIn where you can actually go and populate your publications. So I would highly recommend that you do that piece of LinkedIn. Some other ones that people use, Mendeley is primarily a citation management program, but it also has an online networking component and a data repository. So if you want to submit your data and make your data open, you can submit it to Mendeley and get a DOI. And DOI is basically, it's called a digital object identifier, and it's a way that you can more easily find things like data sets. But it also, whenever you publish something in a journal, you're also going to get a DOI most often. So, but Mendeley anyway is a place where you can sign up for a profile. You can follow other researchers in your field. You can also, you know, if your works end up, you have a profile there, it'll pull in your publications and other people can follow you as well. So it's basically a social networking community for researchers. And that's one thing I didn't mention about Google Scholar. You can also follow other scholars. So if there is someone that you hope to do a postdoc position with down the road, you may want to follow them on Google Scholar or follow them on Mendeley, or you can also do it in Scopus and Web of Science. You can subscribe to different author profiles and they will send you updates on their publications. So this piece of the research reputation is expanding your network. You can think about it that way, okay? You also have services like ResearchGate and academia.edu, which are in the news a lot because they are popular places for people to just put their works. But these companies, ResearchGate and academia.edu, are for-profit companies. So, and you are the product. By putting your stuff on their website, they are, you know, I guess I'm not sure how to describe that you're the product, but your stuff, their whole business is kind of that research networking, whereas Mendeley is a for-profit company, but the Mendeley product itself is not for-profit. The same thing with like Google Scholar. Google is a big for-profit company, but you know, they're not making money off your Google Scholar profile necessarily. They could be indirectly, and you know, Google is a big mysterious company, but the point is that ResearchGate has gotten in trouble in the past. You want to make sure that if you publish your work there that you've checked the copyright and author reuse policies. Don't publish things on ResearchGate or academia.edu that you don't have access to publish, okay? There's not going to be someone there that's checking for you, but you can get in trouble. And there have been lawsuits in the past if you publish things on those websites that you don't have permission to publish. But again, they are big social research networking communities, so you may want to have a profile there. Okay, I also have some information about humanities resources and posting your data, but I'm not going to get into those right now. I'm going to come back to this in just a couple minutes, but I want everyone to just jot this down really quickly. We have a research guide called, it's Research Metrics, the Research Metrics Guide on the library's website, and I'll post a link to this in the chat, but there's a section called the Research Metrics Challenge, and we outline things like ORCID, Google Scholar, citations, LinkedIn, and how to add those publications to your LinkedIn profile. I'm running out of time a little bit, and I was hoping we'd have a little bit of time to do that in the session today, but I highly encourage you to go back and do that after today. And it's all outlined there for you, exactly how you should update these profiles and set them up, okay? But I want to just take a couple minutes to talk about one other aspect of kind of your research reputation. So the other thing that's really important is communicating about your research. So you're getting your stuff onto these profiles, but you see researchers all over social media now, and you know, they're doing things like trying to drive attention to their publications that way. And there is a new metric out there called alt metrics. And basically, alt metrics are the attention your research gets online through social media or through the social web, essentially. So is it being indexed by, or is it being mentioned on a news website? Is it being linked to in Wikipedia? Is it being mentioned on Twitter? Is it being mentioned on Facebook? Are people downloading your articles through Mendeley and reading them? So how much attention is your work getting? And alt metrics is something that you should be familiar with as early career researchers, because as we talked about, it takes a long time for you to accumulate those traditional metrics. So you publish an article, it takes a couple years to do the research, It maybe takes a year if you go through multiple revisions and reviews to get it published into a journal. And then it takes another year or two to even get, like, to start getting attention and start accumulating those citations. So those traditional metrics don't favor early career researchers. But you can do things like use alt metrics to talk about how much attention your research is getting, to kind of contextualize the importance of your research and show its impact in a different way. I would recommend that you can go to this website here. It's called Impact Story, and you can set up a profile there, and it will pull in some of your alt metrics. I honestly can't remember. It used to be free, but I'm not sure if it is anymore. So you may want to, if I'm not encouraging you to pay for something either, but you should check it out. The other thing that you can do is you can put your, if you search for your article and it comes up in Scopus or Summon, or if you put something into Surface, we work, those products all work with companies. One is called PlumX, and I don't have it listed here. Another one is called Altmetric. And if you need help collecting these alt metrics on your publications, you can reach out to your subject librarian. You can contact me, I'm happy to help. But basically those, what I'm trying to say is Scopus includes a service called Plum Analytics. So if you put your article in and it's received any attention, there's going to be a little snapshot of, X number of people downloaded it. It was mentioned X number of times on Twitter, stuff like that. Okay, so you should be putting your publications into something like Scopus and then grabbing those metrics and then talking about them. Okay. This is, I'm flipping into science communication really quickly, but this is one of my close friends who's actually now become a farmer. She was a PhD, she is a PhD biology, she was, oh gosh, at the time she was a PhD student at Cornell getting her degree in fisheries biology, but now she's since graduated and become a farmer. But anyway, she was really great at communicating her research. So she created this brand for herself. She did Cisco research, and she was always out in the field. And so she was tweeting about her stuff. She was doing live Facebook feeds. And I want to add the caveat here. It works really well for some researchers and some professions to talk about your research while it's happening and to do things like create a social media following. Don't do this unless you've talked to your PI or your advisor. You can't go into your lab and record things if it's not allowed, but you may be able to talk about your research, get creative in how you talk about research. But my friend showed that she created this really huge following in the fisheries community, and she was really good at getting people, and then of both biologists, but also she had really good connections with actual fishermen and boat captains and things like that. And then when she came out with publications, she had this already great social network built up. And then, she posts her publications and they get retweeted by this network and she's drawing attention to it. And maybe some of her stuff gets retweeted or her science gets retweeted on like a local fishing group page, something like that. So she was really good at it. I have here, I skipped over one, but it also is important to know who your audience is on social media. There are people on social media like grant funding agencies. NIH, is on there, NSF, some of the big science ones. If they see you and recognize you as someone that's talking about research and, then they're going to notice you. You're creating a brand, you're creating a following. Also potentially things like policymakers. This is one of the things that my friend excelled at really well. Again, she was communicating about her research while it was happening, not just after the publication was done. She was talking about it and getting people engaged in what she was doing while it was happening. And again, I have a Twitter example here, Meet a Scientist. I think that's a really cool one. It's one of like a SciComm kind of example on social media. But again, make sure you talk to your advisor about this before you start tweeting about your research or tweeting, sharing things from your lab, stuff like that. Oh, I guess that is the end of my slides. So anyway, the social media stuff that I mentioned is all directly feeding back into those alt metrics. And then you can gather those alt metrics and talk about how your publications aren't necessarily getting cited, but how they're making an impact and how they're being talked about. Okay. I'm going to open it up. We have 5 minutes left. Does anyone have questions for me before we break today? And again, I apologize that we didn't get to that hands-on activity, but I highly encourage you, make sure you're setting up those profiles. Use that research metrics challenge, which I'm going to pop into the chat now, and go back and actually follow the steps and set those things up. Okay, does anyone have any questions?
I'll throw one out there, Emily.
Is there one?
You talked about the journal metrics and the alt metrics regarding social media. Is there something, like let's say you're doing work that maybe has a public facing dimension, or that's just kind of the way your career is moving? Is there something kind of comparable to journal metrics that would maybe let you talk about citations that you're getting and more like publicly oriented things that are not geared specifically for an academic audience?
Something like a report, you mean?
Or just something that would kind of help to quantify, like if you're getting talked about in, in the newspaper or in more kind of publicly oriented ways of disseminating research, you know what I mean?
So that's kind of what alt metrics are supposed to be. It does pick up things like if you're mentioned in a newspaper.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It does also count things like downloads and how many readers you're getting for your publications. So it's supposed to be a way of measuring the attention that your work is getting. And I believe it does, I think it works more with things that are more traditional publications, but I can't answer necessarily how it works with things like reports or other types of documents. You should be able to collect alt metrics on things like books and book chapters, though.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry, I'm just grabbing that guide really quickly as well. I'm going to pop that into the chat. We have a question in the chat, or a couple of questions. Sorry, I missed these before. Do you have suggestions for making a strategy, a target set of journals to try to publish in within X years? Emmy, are you trying to, I think it does make sense to set up a list of journals that you are interested in publishing in. And again, you want to talk with your advisor about something like that and other people in your career or in your field, but you should have a list of publishers, maybe ones that you're shooting high, where you look at the impact factor or compare it to other journals in your field, look at the rankings for it, and then you have a couple really high ones that are high bar, and then you have some that are good quality as well. And that helps if you maybe don't get into the first journal and you have to submit to other ones, and keep moving down the line. It's also helpful to look into them ahead of time as well, so that you're not pressured by other people that are trying to get you to publish in a specific journal without doing things like looking at the credibility of that journal and also checking the author reuse policies on it. So again, look it up in Sherpa Romeo and make sure that they allow you to publish it or put your post print on an institutional repository or personal website. I don't know if I answered that question because you said something also about a strategy, but within a specific time frame. I'm sure it's also helpful in terms of thinking about goal setting if you have that list, and just having some place to set your sights on that you want to publish. There's also a question from Terry. How often do you recommend we keep track of our metrics? I would say, well, it depends on what kind of metrics you're keeping track of. So if it's alt metrics, I don't know if there is a service where you can sign up and it automatically emails you the metrics, but you can do things like if you publish and then your journal is indexed on Google Scholar or Scopus, a place like that, you can set up an alert in the database and it will automatically email you anytime your work gets cited. So instead of having to go in and check and kind of repeatedly look, you can have it notify you when you're getting new citations. So you're kind of making the systems work for you there. And again,
This was amazing. I gotta go to 12 o'clock, but thank you. I didn't know about Orchid. Appreciate you.
Great, I'm so happy.
It's really great.
It helped. Have a good day.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say again, I'm not the authority on all this stuff. It's an area that I work in, and you should also again be talking to your advisor and your colleagues and your fellow students about where they're publishing, and just have these conversations with them as well.
Emily, there's a lot of interest in your slides. And I'm assuming that all of those things, all of those titles, that those are links in your slides. So Scopus has the link, or is that not the case?
It should. I'm going to go back and double check it before I send it to you, Glenn, to make sure everything is linked. But a lot of the resources, I did mention that some of them today are open or freely available resources, those places where you can look up journal metrics, but the ones that are pay-based that we subscribe to, you should be able to access those through the library's website and then go to the library's database list, and they should all be linked from there.
Great. So yeah, if you want Emily's slides, just go ahead and drop your email address in the chat. If you signed in through SU Zoom, I can automatically get that information. But if you didn't, then make sure you put your name in the chat. Emily, just real quick, I want to give you the chance to plug your event coming up on November 12th, right? With Bio Inspired. I think a lot of the people here today might be interested in that as well.
I don't remember the title of it right now. I think I'm talking about journal publishing more, though, kind of diving deeper into that topic. So, but we'll have more of a STEM kind of slant than today will. So,
right, getting your feet wet.
Covering a lot of I'll cover a lot of similar things in that presentation, but probably just go into more depth on them. And I think it's only an hour long presentation. So yeah, but if you want, I'd be happy to have all of you at the next session. That would be amazing. And as always, please feel free to reach out to me if you have questions. We have a new team in the libraries. I'm part of the Department of Research and Scholarship, but also am leading a new group called the Research Impact Team, where we are trying to talk more about topics like research reputation and metrics and and helping supporting faculty and students in their endeavors and understanding this. So anyway, yes, please reach out if you have questions.
Okay, in whatever way you choose, let's take the opportunity to thank Emily and Lauren for their time here today. Super interesting stuff and a lot of things to go and check out and explore now. So I'll be sure to get the slides to whoever wants them. We're recording this, so a recording will be available at some point. I'll have to edit that and then get it up on the Graduate School's YouTube channel at some point, not immediately, but all these events that we're doing, as long as the presenters are okay with it, will also be archived on the Graduate School's YouTube channel that you can get through the Graduate School webpage. So thank you so much, Emily and Lauren.
Thank you, Glenn. It was great to be here today. Thanks for inviting us.
Yep, thank you for having us.
You are
Bye,
very
everyone.
welcome. Okay. With that, we'll close the session and have a nice weekend, everyone, and good luck as we march onward kind of towards the second half of our abbreviated semester here. Everyone, take care and be well.